Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The ground trembled beneath Carl Sass' boots as he marched alongside his fellow flame knight. The volcanic peaks surrounding Valka belched streams of smoke into the sky, casting an orange glow over the horizon. It was the same every year. The flame dragons would rise from their lairs, seething with fiery rage, and the knights would be called to defend their kingdom. Carl, a young knight with piercing blue eyes and short-cropped dark hair, had never been part of the dragon skirmishes until now. His armor gleamed in the twilight, and his sword felt heavy at his side. The knights around him wore stoic expressions, their faces hardened by years of fighting. For them, this was just another battle. For Carl, it was his chance to prove himself worthy. The dragons' roars echoed through the valley, and Carl's heart raced. In the distance, the massive winged beasts appeared as dark shapes against the sky, their fiery breath illuminating the clouds above them. The earth seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their wings. "Stay focused," muttered Sir Gareth, a veteran knight marching beside Carl. "They may look like mindless beasts, but they were cunning. One mistake and you react." Carl nodded, gripping the hilt of his sword. He had trained for this moment, studied the flame dragon's patterns and weaknesses, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of them in the flesh. Their scales shimmered like molten rock, and their eyes burned with an unnatural fire. As the dragons neared, the knights fanned out in formation. Carl followed Sir Gareth's sled, positioning himself at the edge of the group. The knights began to chant in unison, their voices rising above the cacophony of dragon roar. Magic swirled in the air, the heat of their fire spells blending with the natural warmth of the volcanic land. "Flame, bend to our will," they cried, raising their swords. A wave of fire erupted from the ground, forming a protective barrier around the knight. The dragons circled overhead, hesitating for a moment before diving toward the barrier. Carl watched in awe as the largest dragon, a towering beast with wings that spanned the entire valley, unleashed a torrent of flame from its mouth. The fire struck the knight's barrier, but instead of shattering, the flames coiled around the magical shield. Sir Gareth stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he focused his magic, and the dragon sang, fire bent to his will. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the flames hurtling back at the creature, forcing it to retreat. Carl exhaled, relieved that the barrier had held, but something about the dragon's movements troubled him. It didn't seem like a mindless attack. There was hesitation, a flicker of pain in the creature's glowing eye. "Carl, focus," Sir Gareth barked, snapping him out of his thoughts. "We're not done yet." The knights pressed forward, their barrier moving with them as they advanced toward the dragon. Another dragon swooped low, but this time Carl was ready. He swung his sword, igniting the blade with his own fire magic, and struck at the dragon. Shuffling, his sword connected with the beast, scales sending a shower of sparks into the air. The dragon roared in pain, but again Carl saw something in its eyes, something that didn't belong to a beast. There was fear, and beyond that, a flicker of intelligence. It was as if the dragon wanted to flee, but something was holding it back. Before Carl could dwell on it, the battle raged on. The knights drove the dragons back into the mountains, their fire magic overpowering the creature's attack. By nightfall, the dragons had retreated, and the knights returned to the castle victorious. But Carl's thoughts lingered on the dragon's eye. That night, the Flame Knights celebrated their victory in the Grand Hall of Valka as castle. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and the sound of laughter. Carl sat at the long table, his plate untouched, as he stared into the flickering fire of the hearth. The celebration around him felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's quote world. They were in time mindless. Carl muttered to himself, remembering the way the dragon had looked at him. They were suffering. "Talking to yourself already, Carl," a voice interrupted. Carl turned to see Elsa, a dragon rider, with long, fiery red hair and a fierce expression, sitting down beside him. She was still in her battle gear, her dragon scale armor gleaming in the firelight. "I'm just thinking about the battle," Carl said, avoiding her gaze. Elsa raised an eyebrow. "You are not like the other knights, are you?" "What do you mean?" "They see the dragons as enemies. But you," she studied him for a moment, her green eyes piercing. "You saw something else, didn't you?" Carl hesitated, unsure if he should speak his mind, but something about Elsa's presence felt reassuring. She wasn't tidy like the other knights either. Her bond with her dragon made her different, more attuned to the creatures than the other. "I think they were cursed," Carl admitted the dragons, they were not attacking us because they want to. It sounded like they were being controlled. Elsa's expression softened. I've felt the same thing. My dragon, her name is Ember. She. Never been like those. We fight. There's something wrong with the flame dragons, but no one listens. They think I am just being sentimental. Carl leaned closer. Do you think there's sent a way to help them? Elsa's eyes flickered with a mix of hope and uncertainty, maybe. But if there is, we don't need to understand what's controlling them first. At that moment, a third figure approached the table, a tall, thin man with disheveled hair and glasses that seemed a little too large for his face. Thor, the scholar from the arcane library, was known for his eccentricities, but his knowledge of ancient magic was unmatched. I couldn't help but overhear, Thor said, sitting down across from them. You were both on the right track. Their Sisu curse, an ancient one tied to the flame dragon. It goes back centuries, long before the flame knights existed. Carl's heart quickened. What kind of curse? Thor adjusted his glasses, a glint of excitement in his eye. The flame dragons were once protectors of Valka, revered for their power over fire. But during the Great War, a dark sorcerer placed a curse on them, turning them into mindless weapons of destruction. The Flame Knights were created to keep them in check, but the curse remained. Why hasn't anyone tried to break it? Elsa asked. Thor shrugged, because no one knows how the sorcerer who cast the curse died centuries ago, and the magic is buried deep within the ruins of Valka's ancient temple. It's a dangerous path, filled with traps and dark creatures. But if you are serious about freeing the dragons, that's where you will find your answer. Carl and Elsie exchanged a glance. The idea of venturing into the ruins, facing the unknown, was daunting. But Carl knew they had no choice. If there was a chance to free the flame dragons from their suffering, they had to take it. The next morning, Carl, Elsa, and Thor set out for the Forgotten Ruin. The journey was perilous, taking them through treacherous volcanic terrain and past hostile creatures drawn to the dragons' power. The air grew hotter with each step, and the ground beneath them cracked and hissed as molten lava bubbled just below the surface. Thor led the way, his nose buried in an old tattered map. According to this, the ruins should be just beyond that ridge, he said, pointing to a jagged peak in the distance. We'll have to be careful. The ruins are ancient, and the magic there is unpredictable. Carl nodded, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Elsa walked beside him, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Though she said little, Carl could sense her determination. She had more at stake than any of them. Her bond with Ember had made her a part of the dragon's world, and she couldn't stand by while they suffered. As they reached the ridge, the ruins came into view. Massive stone pillars jutted out of the ground, half buried in the volcanic ash. The remnants of an ancient temple lay scattered across the landscape, its once majestic structure now reduced to rubble. This is it, Thor said, his voice hushed with awe. The Temple of the Dragon Lord. Carl's stomach churned at the name. The Dragon Lord was a figure of legend, a dark sorcerer who had once ruled over the flame dragons with an iron fist. His power had been so great that even in death, his curse lingered, controlling the dragons from beyond the grave. Carl stepped forward, feeling a strange weight in the air as they entered the ruined temple. The scent of sulfur and ash clung to his skin, and the deeper they went, the more intense the heat became. The ancient walls seemed to hum with a forgotten magic, a presence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Thor was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. The curse lingers here, I can feel it. Elsa's hand remained on the hilt of her sword, her eyes scanning the darkened corners of the ruins. Whatever, Sesh here doesn't Trop want us to find the truth. Carl nodded, his heart pounding in his chest, but we were not turning back now. They moved deeper into the temple, stepping carefully over broken stones and crumbling pillars. The architecture, though ancient, still hinted at its former grandeur. Massive dragon carvings adorned the walls, their eyes glinting with what seemed like malice. The oppressive atmosphere weighed heavier the closer they got to the inner sanctum. Suddenly, Thor stopped in his tracks, his eyes fixed on a large stone door at the far end of the hall. This is it. Beyond that door lies the source of the curse. Carl felt his pulse quicken as he approached the door. It was covered in strange runes, the kind he had never seen before. Thor ran his fingers over them, muttering something under his breath as he tried to decipher the ancient text. It's the warning, Thor said, his voice barely audible. It says that only the chosen can enter. Anyone else will face the wrath of the Dragon Lord. Carl swallowed hard. How do we know if we were chosen? Thor gave him a grim look. We don't. Without another word, Carl placed his hand on the door. The stone was hot to the touch, but he pushed against it with all his strength. With a groaning sound, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark chamber beyond. The air inside was thick and heavy, as if the very essence of the curse was alive and breathing. The chamber was vast, its ceiling disappearing into darkness, and at its center stood a large, ornate altar. Above the altar, suspended in midair, was a massive crystal glowing with an eerie red light. The crystal pulsed with energy, casting long shadows across the room. The Dragonlord's heart whispered, "That crystal is the key to the curse. It's what's controlling the dragon." Elsa's eyes widened in recognition. "If we destroy it, we free the dragons," Carl finished. But before they could take a step toward the altar, the temperature in the room spiked. The floor rumbled beneath their feet, and a deep, booming voice echoed through the chamber. "You dare enter my domain." A figure materialized from the shadows, a towering form clad in black armor, his eyes glowing with the same red light as the crystal. The Dragonlord. His presence was suffocating, a cold malice radiating from him, despite the searing heat. Carl instinctively drew his sword, but the Dragonlord merely laughed, his voice reverberating off the wall. "Do you truly think you can break my curse? My power is eternal. The dragons are mine, bound to my will, and now you will be too." With a wave of his hand, the Dragonlord summoned from the ground, encircling the group. The fire was unlike any Carl had ever seen, darker, more sinister, as if it had a life of its own. Elsa lunged forward, her sword ablaze with her own fire magic, but the Dragonlord deflected her attack effortlessly. The force of the impact sent her crashing to the ground. Carl's grip on his sword tightened as he stepped forward. "Were you not afraid of you?" The Dragonlord's eyes narrowed, and with a flick of his wrist, a torrent of flame hurtled toward Carl. He barely had time to raise his sword, channeling his own magic to deflect the attack. The heat seared his skin, and the force of it sent him stumbling back. Thor, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up, his voice filled with desperation. "It said the crystal. You have to destroy the crystal." Carl's gaze shot to the glowing heart above the altar. It pulsed with power, feeding the Dragonlord's strength. If they could destroy it, they could break his hold over the flame dragon. With a burst of energy, Carl sprang toward the altar, dodging another wave of fire from the Dragonlord. He reached the base of the altar, but the Dragonlord's voice boomed again, his power growing more intense. "You are nothing without your flames, knight. You will burn with the rest." Carl gritted his teeth as he climbed the altar, the heat from the crystal almost unbearable. He could feel the power radiating from it, the curse woven into its very core. For a moment, doubt flickered in his mind. Could he truly break something so ancient, so powerful? But then he remembered the dragons, their tortured eyes, their suffering. He couldn't truly let the curse continue. With a final surge of strength, Carl raised his sword high and brought it down on the crystal. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, and for a moment, everything went still. The red glow of the crystal faltered, then flickered, before shattering into a million shards. The Dragonlord let out a roar of fury, his form wavering as if the power holding him together was unraveling. "No, you will not." But before he could finish, his body disintegrated into ash carried away by the wind. The flames around them vanished, and the room grew quiet. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, and Carl felt the heat dissipate, replaced by a strange calm. Elsa pushed herself to her feet, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You did it." Carl collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged. "We did it." Thor approached the shattered remains of the crystal, his expression one of awe and relief. "The curse is broken. The flame dragons are free." The return to Volca was bittersweet. News of their success spread quickly, but not everyone viewed it as a victory. The Flame Knights had relied on the curse to maintain their power, and without the threat of the flame dragons, the order's role in the kingdom was called into question. Gal stood at the edge of the volcanic range, watching as the now freed flame dragons soared across the sky. Their fiery breath was no longer a weapon, but a symbol of their rebirth. For the first time in centuries, they were free to live as they once had, guardians of fire, not slaves to it. Elsa stood beside him, her hand resting on Emberside the dragon. Scales glistened in the sunlight, and for the first time, Carl saw peace in the creature's eyes. "What will you do now?" Elsa asked, her voice soft. Carl looked out over the horizon, his mind racing with the possibility. The Flame Knights were all he had known, but the truth he had uncovered about their history had shaken him to his core. I know, he admitted, but I do know I can go back to the Order. Not after everything we've learned. Elsa nodded, her eyes on the dragons. We changed things, Carl, and that's not something the Knights or Valka will forget. Thor approached them, his usual eccentricity replaced by a rare moment of solemnity. The world will be different now. The flame dragons will no longer be a threat. But that doesn't mean the challenges are over. There are still those who will try to use magic for power, to control what they don't truly understand. Carl glanced at the scholar, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and we'll be there to stop them. As the sun set over the volcanic peaks, casting a warm glow across the landscape, Carl felt a sense of peace. The curse was broken, the flame dragons were free, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was walking his own path, one not bound by the traditions of the past, but shaped by the choices he made. Elsa turned to him, her smile soft and genuine. Wherever that path takes you, Carl, I'll be right there with you. And as the last light of day faded into night, the Flame Knight stood at the edge of the world he had helped reshape, ready to face whatever came next.